an original.
From Story Studio Network.
Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
Let's get ready to rumble!
It's showtime.
Well, welcome in. Here we go. It is April the 1st. First day of April. And all kinds of stuff going on. But and we're going to get into the politically speaking issues of the day tomorrow with our friends on Now and Next. The cast will be in, our communications strategy team. Thursday is our recording date for the On the Ledge Roundtable. Kathleen Wynne, Tim Hudak, Keith Leslie, and John Wright will be here. But it came into my inbox last week, and I thought, well, okay, we spent a whole campaign here in Ontario talking about everything but the issues. We are spending an entire campaign federally talking about almost everything but the issues. And I think the timeliness of this email that I got, I thought was worth noting. And that is to say, there are issues ongoing that we need to be really aware of, that are going to land on the Premier's desk, that are going to land on the Prime Minister's desk at some point. And so let's get at that. So let's just consider this sort of the issues-based version of On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. I'm Dave Trafford. And I'm willing to bet that whoever is listening, you right now listening to this, you have been a caregiver, you have required a caregiver, and you are right now in the state of giving care. And we've all done that to some degree, and there are real challenges in that. There's an intimacy about it that is important. There's an advocacy about it that comes with it in terms of taking care of your loved ones, your family, your friends, and that's all important. But there's also sort of that it's become integrated into the system, the caregiving system, certainly here in Ontario. So it is Family Caregiver Day here, and it's April the 1st. And I know everybody's talking about the carbon tax. So let's add some oxygen to this conversation. Lauren Bates is here, chairs the Ontario Caregiver Coalition. I'll get it on me, yeah. Daniel Nowoselski is here. He's an advocacy manager and a hospice palliative care worker, as well as being a member of the Canadian Cancer Society. And Malene Stewart is the co-chair of the OCC Caregivers Collective. First of all, thanks for reaching out, because I think sometimes folks, Daniel, they listen to a show like this, and they'll send a little note, but you guys had purpose, and good on you for making an effective pitch. But I think it's an important story. So thanks for doing that, first of all. And I'll only start by saying, reiterating what I said off the top. We've all got personal experience with this. And I don't know anybody who has said, well, this is happening to somebody else. And clearly, the three of you have had that experience.
I think, the stats are that right now about a quarter of Ontarians are caregivers right now. But given the changes in the context, demographics, that number is expected to increase, over the next 5 years. Right now there's 4 million caregivers approximately in Ontario. In another 5 years, it's going to be 6.5 million. As you say, this is something that touches almost every life. If you're not a caregiver now, you're going to be one soon.
And to be clear, Lauren, you're talking about volunteer caregivers.
That's right. The family, the friends, the neighbors that are providing just a range of supports to the people that they care about. So, sometimes people say, well, I'm not really a caregiver because all I do is I take my mom to all of her appointments, and then I phone and I try and figure out what things there are. And then I just drop off meals for her at night, and I just check in on her once a day. So I'm not really a caregiver, right? So people sometimes, there's a range that goes with caregiving. And for some folks, it's 24/7, right? Mm-hmm. That's what they're doing all day, every day. Other folks are doing it, in a more intermittent basis, but we often find for caregivers, part of the mental burden is even if you're not there all day, every day, that's where part of your mind is all day, every day, right? Because I know for me, for many years, I was always, every morning, I woke up and, forgive this, but I think, what fresh hell will happen today?
Yeah.
Because you just didn't know until the day was done.
Yeah. And my own experience, and it's very fresh, but it goes back to 2016, Daniel. My dad was diagnosed with a very rare form of cancer. He lived in southwestern Ontario. Mom and dad lived on the St. Clair River between Chatham and Sarnia. The closest place he could get proper care was London. And that sounds like, well, that's not bad. That's still a 90-minute drive from his house. And I'm 90 minutes from London. So between my brother and I, to Lauren's point, that was 3 hours of drive, just part of that caregiver, because, he wasn't in any shape to drive himself, and my mom wasn't in any shape to do that because she was experiencing the pressures of being the primary caregiver. So it's those sorts of things that I think we just don't take into account.
Absolutely, and we hear that a lot in terms of the experiences, and it's 3 hours of drive when there's good weather. It's, when we're talking about, we just went through a winter with a ton of snow, things like those challenges, like that really adds up the additional pressure. And what we see time and time again when we talk to caregivers, it's the mental health pressure, but it's also the financial cost that really impacts the caregivers. So, it's the hour and a half each way plus of gas plus paying for parking. Even if the carbon tax comes off, that's still a financial cost that people put off. And what we often see as well is that people have to leave their jobs or disrupt their ability to participate in the workforce. 1 in 3 people in the workforce right now in Ontario is a caregiver, based on working age and how that applies. And so that's going to have a real impact on our economy if we are not able to be as productive because people are distracted by their caregiving responsibilities. And that has a longer term impact in terms of our ability to manage the system and build all the things that we want to build in Canada as we deal with this moment, this existential threat. We know that this is looming in the background and going to be a huge factor in our ability to function as a society. The fact that many people are being relied upon to support their loved one, and because the system doesn't have the capacity to take care of them.
Yeah, Malene, this becomes a productivity issue first and foremost. I mean, and it's easy to underestimate the economic repercussions.
Yeah, as my colleagues were speaking, I was thinking about this exercise that I do in the classroom. And what I do is I put the name of the caregiver at the center, and I ask the students to think about, or the care recipient, so the individual receiving care. I think about all those things that are involved, doctor's appointments, as you had mentioned, medication, pharmacy. There's so many different responsibilities involved, specialist appointments, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, nutritional needs, speech and language, swallowing assessments. There's so much that's involved. And usually by the time we're done, the whiteboard is full of possibilities, of things that, is involved with this individual. And then I ask the students to think about the caregiver. Think about the person responsible for all this. They also have their own maybe medical needs, doctor's appointments, employment. And for me, I cared for my mom after her diagnosis of Alzheimer's. She was quite young. She had just graduated with her master's in education at 60. So this is not something that we were expecting. And so we made the decision to move her in. It was a quite easy decision. I thought, this is wonderful. I'm going to have live-in help, and we get to have coffee with my favorite person every morning. She quickly deteriorated, and as the world shut down with COVID, it was a very difficult road that we had to travel, and at the same time caring for 4 children. And so that's one of the other pieces, that the complexities that caregivers are faced with their own lives. I was working full time. The system, as you had mentioned, is not designed or structured for us to age in place. There was a lot of advocacy on my part. Even as a social worker, I felt that I worked in a hospital setting part-time. And I thought, I know systems. I know how to advocate. I know how to navigate the system. And it was very difficult for me.
Yeah, there's a number of folks in our family who are healthcare executives, healthcare professionals, et cetera. And Lauren, even when they are engaged in this, they find it to be a challenge to speak the right language, to be advocates for whoever is being helped. I mean, I just throw this out as anecdotal issue. My mom recently had to visit a local hospital here in Toronto, and when I went to pick her up when she was discharged, I had to go downstairs and get the wheelchair to bring it upstairs to her room so that she could be discharged properly. There was no porter in the building that could do something as simple as that. So I think we underestimate how shaky that ground is around care, primary care specifically, but we're talking about more than that here.
Yeah, and I myself am a lawyer by training, so I spent a lot of time. I'm very comfortable phoning people, advocating, and so on. And I also found it very, very difficult to put the supports needed around my mom to figure out how to navigate that system. And I thought all the time, what happens to people who don't have that comfort or don't have that experience with trying to figure out the system? And the stats are that 75% of all the care that's provided, we think all the time about sustaining our health system. 75% of all the care that's provided is provided by family and friends, not in the formal system in the quote, but by quote, informal caregivers. It doesn't feel very informal when you're doing it, I'll tell you. Mm-hmm. And so if caregivers if the system's not structured to support caregivers, what's going to happen to our health system? Like, how can we sustain our health? And I also want to note, other systems, as you mentioned, the developmental services system, for example, right? For people who are younger with disabilities in systems around complex medical needs. Or we saw what happened during COVID in the long-term care system when family caregivers were not permitted to be present. That is, once a person is admitted to long-term care, the family responsibility is in no way over. So all of these systems really rely on caregivers and yet are not in return providing the supports that caregivers need in order to do this really important role in the way that people want to. People, are acting out of love and devotion, and it's made really hard. And sometimes, caregivers will break. That it can't go on. And if we don't sustain caregivers cannot sustain our systems.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that, like aging in place and aging at home, like that's a policy choice we've chosen for a lot of reasons. That's what people want. It's also a lot cheaper, but it's a lot cheaper because a lot of the caregivers are doing the work, and we have to figure out how we can actually sustainably afford to put this on caregivers, but also and address those challenges while also making sure that, like, when they ask for help, they're respected, they're heard, and their needs are met. We're profiling some caregivers today on our social media channels. And one of the stories that really spoke to me the most is Malene and her son both shared the impact of when home care workers don't show up on time or show up earlier than you're planning, and the ways in which it disturbs your entire day. Or the way when I speak to my grandmother, who's 96 in a long-term care home, her day's entirely shaped by, was she able to get dressed in time to go down for breakfast? That it definitely affects her mood. If we are not prepared to offer aging in place, we can't keep making that same policy choice. And so we have to figure out how we make the system sustainable in order to make sure that caregivers actually can do and provide the care that they want to provide to their loved ones.
Yeah, aging in place, though, is also about it's a housing issue, Malene, as much as anything else. I mean, you don't necessarily have to be ill or somehow disabled in your elder years to want to age in place in a healthy way, but you still need some level of support. So that's a housing policy as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We had to make changes here to renovate, but we're grateful that we had the resources. And I know that even in this economic climate, there are many families, many individuals that just don't have the resources to be able to care for a loved one in their home or where they are. So that's definitely a gap that I think.
So what kind of changes did you have to make?
We had to renovate. We had to renovate and add 2 bedrooms. as I had mentioned. So we were a family of 7, and then we adopted a little puppy. And, we had to create space. And it wasn't easy. And I also want to sort of touch on the mental health aspect of caregiving. One of the pieces that we sometimes overlook is that we're also grieving. And so, yes, it's a complicated grief, especially if you are, dealing with Alzheimer's or dementia-related illness. Dave, as you mentioned, maybe cancer. You start to grieve that person. You start to grieve maybe a loss of ability that they had. For my mom, it was speaking. She was an orator. Storytelling is central in our culture. And to not hear those stories anymore was a huge loss for us and our family.
Yeah, it's funny how when you get to that point, all of these, and I said off the top how intimate that is, and I don't say that just in terms of it being family. I saw my dad in ways I never expected I would have seen my dad, and we would all go through that. So that grieving is happening in the moment while they're still present, Daniel, and there's the hard part about the caregiver that I don't know how you quantify that.
Yeah, but it is something that, we are working towards, and we've developed some policy papers and solutions around caregiver mental health and how we support people through those journeys. There are some amazing programs out there, whether you're talking at individual hospices that offer incredible grief supports before, during, and after you lose a loved one, or the Ontario Caregiver Organization, which is an agency of the Ontario government. They've built some really great caregiver education tools and short-term counseling supports that are specialized for caregivers. But all of these programs are not designed to scale. They have not been funded in a way that allows them to grow. And if caregivers can find them, great, but they're not readily or available accessibly throughout the province. And some of these best practices that we see, there's an amazing caregiver clinic at the Princess Margaret Cancer Centre. But if you're the Cancer Centre in London, you may not have access to the same sort of programs. And making sure that we can scale up and use those best practices across the country across the province is one of our major asks of the Ontario government, and something we've been lobbying for in the election and in our submission to the government on what they should include in their next budget.
Okay, so we've spent 20 minutes here talking about the problem, and I know you want to bring this to light, but let's just twist this around a little bit. Lauren, if 75% of the caregivers are volunteer family members, why the hell aren't we making more noise about this? I mean, shouldn't that be a significant enough voice to be able to say, God damn it, I'm not going to put up with it anymore. We got to do something about it.
Well, and that's a great comment or a great question. That's why the Ontario Caregiver Coalition exists, is people wanting to make noise and raise the voice. I mean, realistically, for many caregivers at the moment when they're in the thick of caregiving and they're trying to keep up with, their employment, their other obligations, their caregiving, all they're doing is living from moment to moment. So it becomes very hard to advocate for many people at the moment when you most need to have that advocacy happen at a system level. People are very focused on solving their day-to-day problems. So that's why it's important for us as the Caregiver Coalition to look at this not just as each person's, private journey through, a series of trapdoors and, locked exits, but also at the system level. What can we do to make this more sustainable? And as Daniel has mentioned, there are things that can be done, right? So, for example, we talked about the financial burden of caregiving. It can be very, very expensive. There can be a lot of out-of-pocket costs. People may have to scale back their employment. I know many caregivers who are worried about their own retirement, their own financial future because of the financial sacrifices they've made in order to care. And so, there is, for example, right now, a federal tax credit for caregivers, but it is designed in such a way that only 8% of all the caregivers get it. And even if you get it, it's in the hundreds of dollars. It's not anything more.
Barely covers a couple of ambulance rides.
Exactly, right? So we've worked closely with a number of other organizations, including the Monk School of Public Policy's Public Good Initiative, to design a caregiver allowance that would begin to meaningfully address the need. And we were actually really pleased by the progress we saw last year, where MPP Wayne Gates from Niagara, the NDP critic for long-term care and home care, brought forward a motion in the House to recognize our proposal for an Ontario caregiver support benefit. And that was supported by both the Liberal and the Green parties, right? So there is growing kind of recognition and momentum, I think, around issues of caregiving, which is something we're really wanting to build on, to work together with others to find solutions, because solutions can be found.
Yeah, and you mentioned the party lines here, though. But Malene, this is not a partisan issue. This is going to hit everybody.
Absolutely, yeah. And I don't want to lose sight of our young caregivers as well, because I know that there's sometimes a missed group. We do have individuals that are caring for, their loved ones, and they're, maybe still in school. I've had students in post-secondary college system and having to speak with me because they're also navigating some quite complex stuff at home. And so, as Lauren and my colleague Daniel has said, this is an issue that is, so many people are facing. It's also isolating as well. So I think that's another piece that I'm happy that the OCC is here to shine the light, and it's because it is an isolating issue.
So how is OCC, how's it funded, Daniel?
We're a volunteer organization. We have one paid staff person, so we mostly operate from either grants or research honorariums that we receive, as well as member fees from organizations so for instance, Alzheimer's Society of Ontario or MS Canada that participate in the organization. So folks, would you want to get involved? We have lots of ways to join on our website. You can join if you don't want to be a full member, you can even just sign up for our newsletter. That's incredibly helpful, and you can follow us on our social media to advance this conversation forward. And it is a really exciting time. We see the change happening. Nova Scotia has a caregiver allowance and has it for a few years. We've seen the benefit in terms of reducing pressure on their long-term care and hospital system. New Brunswick and PEI are looking at that and implementing it. And those are governments across the ideological spectrum. So we're hoping solutions like the ones we're proposing are ones that are that can be implemented in other jurisdictions as well, like Ontario.
Yeah, and as you're talking, Daniel, I think, Lauren, this leads me to think that this is something that needs a federal structure similar to the way we've approached childcare or whatever, and then to say, here's how the feds are going to deal with it, and then have the provinces buy into it. Because it seems to me we're ready for that kind of conversation, understanding that the provinces would hold the pen on this. But once you see one do it, you see the others doing it. And then I think then that voice starts saying, hey, what about me, becomes fairly loud.
So that's interesting that you flag that, Dave, because the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence has recently released a national strategy for caregiving focusing on the federal level. So I think that is very important to shine the light at the federal level. And, they're working hard to get that issue heard as part of the current, election. But I also think it's important that a lot of the issues we're talking about here, health, social services, access to respite care, mental health supports, are within provincial jurisdiction. So it's important as well in Ontario for us to be looking very specifically at what this provincial government can do, because there is a lot of room for action at the provincial level. That's why we've been working on rolling out these policy briefs. So, for example, an issue we haven't touched on yet, which I think is very, very important to caregivers, is the idea of respite or getting a break, right? Mm-hmm. In many ways, that's the number one thing that can make caregiving more sustainable for people, is just being able to get a break. And for some people, that just means I just need 2 hours out of the house to get the groceries picked up. And for other people, it's like, I need to be able to sleep through the night once, right? Like I need a weekend away so I can see my grandchildren, right? And it's very, very hard to get that because we actually have no system for respite in Ontario. We have some great services, but we don't have a system. It's very fragmented. Most caregivers don't know that there's such a thing as respite available. It's only offered often when there's a crisis. Often you end up having to pay out of pocket for it. But if we were actually able to say to somebody, look, every week you can have 2 hours if what you really need is just to be able to get your hair done, that's what you can get done, because it's going to be...
I got news for you. That's not an issue for me, but carry on.
People will have, right? Like some people think, well, I need to go for a walk all by myself. I heard from one caregiver who said, look, I just want to sit in my car for an hour all by myself and listen to music. That's a break for me. And other people need something more. But to be able to say to people, we see you and you can have this little break so you can go on. And so we have these individual little services that some people are able to navigate to. So we've recommended to government, let's actually have a strategy. Let's create a roadmap to respite so that caregivers, when they need it, can find it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's caring for the caregiver is just as important as anything else.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I wonder if I could just add on to what Lauren is saying. And so the way that the system is set up, and this is for those individuals that are at home, you get a certain amount. They calculate how many hours you're eligible for. And this is through, companies like Bayshore and different organizations that supply, provide PSW care. And so what happens is, like, if they say, okay, you're 2 visits and you get 3 hours a week, then often what happens is you may need that respite. You may want an opportunity to go and watch, your child or grandchild's rugby game, but instead you really want to use those hours to ensure that, the care is provided, right? Is it a day where they would get their bath or shower? We spent thousands of dollars monthly to provide that additional care because of the significant gap that my mom, even when she was unable to, like, she needed, they kind of talk about your ADLs, all those pieces, that being able to get dressed and brush your teeth and feed yourself. She needed support for everything.
And ADL stands for Activities of Daily Living.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Using acronyms. But so we had to supplement that care because I'm one person and I also need to go to work and I also need to take care of many other things. And so I think that's the piece that I don't want lost here. And again, we had the resources. My mom had a pension. So I was like, she would be traveling the world right now if she was able to. We're going to use those funds to ensure that she gets the best care possible.
Yeah, and
the idea, though, that I love that you bring up the fact that, the workers come in to help, but the primary caregiver is so concerned that it's done properly that you're hovering. And that my mom did exactly the same thing when they would come into the house. Here's the other side of this, Daniel, is that my dad got to a point where he didn't want to have anybody else in the house. He just he would just, and on a good day it was okay, but there were many days where I don't want anybody else in the house with me right now. He only wanted my mom in the room. So even to have that service available didn't really help her. And I'm not sure what the solution is there, but the system didn't take that into account.
Certainly, and I like Malene and like talked about before, Dave. I think when I was going through caregiving with my dad, it was during the pandemic, and so that was it was not just we didn't want someone in the house; it wasn't safe for us to have other people externally in the house to come in, and navigating that while going through that was extremely challenging. But I think, especially as we build for that, it's important that we build solutions that are flexible and that work for caregiver needs. Like we've all talked about largely our experience caring for our parents, but a lot of our members are people caring for children with autism or children with developmental services, and they're going to outlive the person that they're caring for. Likely they're going to die before, the person they're caring for is going to outlive them. Sorry, that's what I meant. And so I think in terms of navigating that and setting up the system, it's not just hovering and working towards that. It's also the future planning to support them. So whatever system we build has to be flexible enough to meet caregivers where there are, and to navigate how we can support them best with their needs as their needs evolve. And so there's certainly a role for the federal government, and there's certainly a requirement to collaborate with the provincial governments. And we know that's challenging, but we need to figure out where those solutions are, where we can build on those best practices, whether it's mental health or existing respite services that exist but aren't widely accessible, navigating that between the health and the social and developmental services systems in order to collaborate. This isn't and certainly that's not an easy problem to solve, but we need governments to be actively working towards that, because like Lauren mentioned, it's going to raise to 6.5 million caregivers over the next 5 years. In the 2030s, that number is going to hit 9 million. That is a significant portion of our population. And frankly, also, we know it's disproportionately going to impact women. And so we need to make sure in terms of navigating that, women are 54% of the caregivers right now, but 2/3 of the caregivers providing 20 hours more per week of care. So in terms of navigating that impact, we need to make sure our systems are ready in order to navigate that now, because this problem is lurking in the background waiting to get us, and we need to be able to address that sooner.
Well, John Wright, who co-hosts On the Ledge, and he's a pollster, he's done a lot of work and research in this area, and he will tell you that by 2040, that's the tipping point in terms of our demographic and our healthcare system, that guys like me are going to need the caregiver, rather than be the caregiver, because the boomers are just going to get to a stage in their lives where they're going to need that. Now, they may be healthier than previous, generations, but that doesn't mean there isn't going to be the need for that kind of help. Daniel, before we go, where should we go to help you do your work?
So you can go to our website, www.ontariocaregivercoalition.ca, or follow us on Facebook, X, Instagram, and LinkedIn.
Very good. So Malene, Lauren, Daniel, thanks for the good work you do, and thanks for being here today. We'll be sure to tag you when we post the show, and feel free to share it in your networks.
We absolutely will. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Dave.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.